I asked my son if he knew what this Unravel game was. So the first thing we're going to try and figure out the mystery of is what this Unravel actually refers to, this image. I thought it was cute and fun, but I don't know. Does anybody know if there's a video game called Unravel? No, nobody knows.
Wrong demographic for that, I think.
Yeah, I don't know.
My son might know.
I'm not really a movie person, so I thought, well, maybe people who know a lot more about movies than me would know, but no, it's cute anyway. Well, I thought today we would do our best to keep this a bit of an iterative session. Mia and I will certainly give ourselves a test, or you should feel free to ask any questions that you have about this process to us. I think we're both very open about our experiences and happy to share them with you. So briefly for today, our agenda is going to be to do some introductions. We have some more sort of didactic activities where we'll give some discussion of key points when it comes to grant writing. I tried to step a little bit away from the typical, but also going to get to some of those key nuts and bolts as well. Also some thoughts about some strategies, and in particular, we're going to dive in a little bit more on how to write up need and maybe just prompt you to think a little more broadly about how you write those compelling descriptions depending on your funder. We'll also do a couple of activities thinking about outcomes and outputs. Logic models, most people are familiar with. I've been teaching them a little bit of a different way to help people stick to the logic of the logic model, which I think can get lost sometimes with the complexities of them. And then also, if you haven't tried it, I have a link in here to Lucidchart where you can kind of test this software, which has been really helpful to us because it allows you to move things around readily. So I figured that might be useful. And then of course, just to have fun and learn from each other as well. So on that note, I figured we could just start with some introductions and getting to know each other. I'll start with myself and then I'll toss it over to you, Mia. I have been at the University of Delaware now for about 9 years. It seems hard to believe, but I'm going up on 9 years here. I came to the University of Delaware from a nonprofit called the Food Trust, which was located in Philadelphia, where I worked for 12 years. And I did a lot of grant writing with the nonprofit organization there. So I have a lot of experience doing very small grants and then also much larger grants. So I kind of span the spectrum, as well as relationship building with funders. So I know a little bit about that aspect of fundraising. I currently am in the Human Development and Family Sciences Department at the University of Delaware, where Terry Ann Richards, who's also a community engaged partner with ACCEL CTR, works as well. So I'll just kind of call out Terry Ann, who's going to help kind of ask questions and facilitate a little bit today. And I live in the region with my husband and 4 kids and a dog and chickens and a cat. So we're busy over here. Mia, I'll toss it to you.
Thanks, Allison. I also live in the region, but I only have 2 kids and a dog recently, but not slowly getting more animals.
No chickens.
Yeah, no chickens yet. But my name is Nih Submission. I am currently the Chief Scientific Officer at Christiana Care. We have an embedded health research institute there called iReach, the Institute for Research on Equity and Community Health, where I lead a team of about 30 scientists doing research that matters for the health of Delawareans. Before that, I was in academics, so I spent 3 years at Drexel University and their epidemiology department in their School of Public Health, and then 5 years at the University of Delaware within the College of Health Sciences. So that's me. I've written a lot of grants from foundations to state-based grants to NIH grants, CDC grants, big grants, little grants. So I'm excited to share my experience with all of you and hear about your experiences. Thanks, Allison.
So Mia, I'm having trouble figuring out how many people we have in our subgroup.
So I'll tell you, there's 15 participants. Do you want me to just call people's names?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. And I think they're alphabetical by first name. So first up is Adriana Alvarado.
Hello. Do we just introduce ourselves?
Yeah, so what I had, Adriana, and I'm not sure if you can see the slide and also see your introduction self, but is your name, of course, and your organization, and then just something you like to do for fun. And then our second phase of this, we'll talk a little bit about grant experience, including needs and frustration. So maybe keep that in mind as we move forward. But for now, just name and organization and maybe something you like to do for fun.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Adriana Verde Soto. I am a student from Ecuador, but I'm doing a PhD at the University of Delaware. And I'm a second year, so I'll be starting grant writing pretty soon. And something I like to do for fun, I guess I like cooking, hiking, pretty non-really exciting stuff, I guess. But yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adriana. Next up, Anna Thompson.
Maybe she stepped away.
Come back to Anna. And DE-CTR.
Hi, hello. Me and Allison. My name is Ann DE-CTR. I'm a Delaware through and through. I've worked for Christiana Care now twice as a nurse, once in the neonatal ICU, and then once most recently as a psychiatric nurse practitioner in maternal mental health. I am now a free agent. I'm opening my own company in Delaware called Perinatal Prana. I'll be doing community behavioral health for women. And something I like to do for fun lately, it's been yoga with Adrian in the morning. She's free on YouTube and she's fabulous.
Oh.
Something for everyone, very, helps to ground you down in these times of grant writing. And in terms of my grant experience, I have just newly been awarded a grant, ARPA grant, Community Behavioral Health Grant, which I wrote back in December, passionate about trying to open up doors for women experiencing perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. I was awarded a grant, and now I'm looking to learn very quickly what to do with said grant while lifting it all up in Newark, Delaware. Thank you.
Thanks, Ann. Tjkomi. And I probably butchered your name, and I'm very sorry.
No, you didn't. Hi, everyone. My name is Tjkomi. I should put on my video, I guess. I am a pediatric endocrinologist at Nemours. I agree with yoga with Adrian. That's good. I love to go for long walks for fun. That's my therapy. Grants, I don't have a lot of experience, but that's where I am hoping to get into more grant writing, and that's why I'm here.
Awesome. Denise Taylor.
Hi, I'm Denise. I work for Christiana Care, and I like to ride my bike. Are we supposed to do number 2 now, or we're doing that later?
Not yet.
Okay. So yeah,
Denise.
Thank you. That's all I got.
Katie Gifford.
Oh, you're muted, Katie.
Sorry about that. Hi, I'm Katie Gifford. I work at the University of Delaware in the Medicaid Research Group, the Center for Community Research and Service. Something I like to do fun. I'm a big bird watcher these days. That's one of my hobbies. Nice to see everyone.
Nice to see you, Katie. Matt Cohen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Matt. I'm a faculty member at the University of Delaware. And my favorite things to do are to play with my kids and to not play with my kids.
In that order.
Yes, that order.
Mina Astavari.
Hi everyone, my name is Mina. I work at iReach at Christiana Care. I'm one of the researchers. For fun, I love to go on long walks and pet other people's dogs because I don't have a dog myself. I have experience with grants. I have an MRDA and a pilot from CTR, but I love to get more experience for writing grants for NIH or CDC.
Pragyan Kanal.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pragyan Now. I'm a research associate at Christiana Care at iReach. As far as what I like to do for fun, I got more into hiking like over the course of the pandemic. So I like going on short hikes. I can't do like too long, but it's fun just being out in nature.
And Sarah Lang. Lang.
Hi, my name's Sarah Lang. I work at the University of Delaware as an evaluation and research coordinator in the College of Health Sciences. And I am with my people because one of my favorite, when it's something fun to do, I was like, oh, I don't know if I should say this, but it's taking long walks. So I just took a long walk this morning. And also I resonate with Matt because I enjoy spending time with my kids, but I also enjoy my own time. So
That's awesome, Sarah. Terry Ann Richards.
Hi, everyone. I'm Terry Ann, and I work at UD at the Center for Research and Educational Social Policy. I'm also a Community Advisory Council member, and I live in the area of Bear. And something that I like to do is fun, is either I like watching random documentaries or talking to my 16-year-old or soon to be 16-year-old about things that he sees online that he doesn't really get, but I try to explain it to him anyway.
And last is Wendy Bassett.
Hello, my name again, Wendy Bassett. I work at Christiana Care Hospital. I work under the Dr. Omar Khan in the research coordinating group. I don't really have much experience in grant writing or for that matter, because I'm actually new in joining, so I'm trying my best to learn as much as possible.
Welcome. Anyone I missed? All right. Welcome, everyone.
So I figured we could just start off while we kind of guessed maybe what people would be interested in, to just get a little bit of a sense. And I know some people introduced some of their background in terms of their grant experience. It feels like we have a few folks maybe in the group who are pretty experienced, and then others who are really just trying to learn a lot more about the lay of the land. But within that context, do you guys have any requests for something that we make sure we cover today, or want to express any needs or even frustrations that you've had that maybe we can help mitigate as we go along the way?
I was looking at sort of the blurb for this session, and I saw advertised like a toolbox of resources for investigators. So I was interested in learning more about that, and especially any resources in Delaware or any of the CTR partner institutions that I can sort of use to leverage for grant applications and support.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I think the toolbox isn't necessarily a formal one, but I think you'll find a lot of ideas in here, and also checklist kind of shortlist things that I would put in a toolbox category, along with some links to resources that maybe you knew about and forgot about, or could be the first time you're hearing them. So hopefully this will help check off some of those boxes for you. But if there's other things that you were hoping to learn that we didn't provide, please let me know, because I've even taught a whole class on this. So I do have a pretty good sort of cadre of resources available. How about others? Needs, frustrations, wishes?
I agree with Matt. I was hoping for the toolbox, ideas for funding, where to look for funding, if there are examples of good grants and badly written grants, right? What do you need to include? How do you stay focused on what you need to do? That's what I'm looking for, because I've written some that have gone through and some that have not. And so I really want to know what is an example of a good one and what is not a good one. Like, what should you take out? And then, you know, sources for funding. That's what I was hoping for.
Hi, and sorry, I jumped ahead and gave a little more than I was supposed to in my introduction. But what I was hoping for specifically was, as a clinician in the community with a one-off grant, my initial thought and plan was to develop a nonprofit to sustain, but having just engaged a little bit in this conference this morning, my thought is academic partnerships, healthcare partnerships for sustainability and future grant writing. Where do you start with that? You know, how do you develop that team?
So I think, you know, the short answer is you're in a great place to start to develop that team. And the way that I've connected with people is really just through people reaching out saying, you know, I think that you might have a skill set that would be complemented in this grant proposal. Is this something you have the bandwidth to take on, or you'd be interested in talking more about? So I think a lot of these partnerships happen, you know, just through a simple outreach like that. Certainly too, if you have a network and you can ask somebody to ask somebody, that's always useful too. But I think your idea is spot on to figure out how you can build some of these partnerships early on. So when the grant comes out, you're able to respond to it pretty quickly.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just going to go ahead and move on then. I think we've summarized this a little bit as we go, but the toolbox definitely seems like something that people are interested in. And the idea, and Mia, I'm curious if you have any good resources for this. You know, it's always easy to find a good grant, but I never want to be the person who puts out the bad grant. I don't know, Mia, do you have any instructionally bad grants?
You know, I bet you we could find some. I probably even have some that I've written. I would imagine so early in my career, or when there's like a 3-week turnaround. That's when I usually write a really bad grant. But I do like the idea of the toolbox, maybe including examples. And I wonder if we could bring that back actually to the CTR as we continue to think about, you know, ways to improve. And maybe we put a section on the website that has, you know, the information we're talking about now, plus additional information that people are interested in.
Yeah, that sounds good. And anybody feel free to chime in as we go along. I know if we were in, you know, a normal setting, we would all be in a room and people would be able to kind of just easily raise their hand or chime in. But there's only 15 of us. I can see like 8 of you on my screen at a time. So just go ahead and take yourself off mute and say something if you'd like to chime in. We welcome it.
I will say one other quick thing is to keep in mind for everyone is that, you know, a bad grant for one funding agency might be a good grant for another. And so I think that's also really important to keep in mind as Allison, you sort of talk about this and writing kind of the aim and thinking about that. It's also thinking about like, what is the funding agency? What are their priorities? Some examples of things they funded. And, you know, don't be afraid to sort of fail in one place and then take that same idea and turn it around and it might fit a different place better.
Yeah, and building off of that thought too, Mia, is you don't have to write brand new grants every time. So a lot of times when we were at the nonprofit, we would have, I mean, honestly, we could only run so many programs at the same time, but we needed many sources of funding in order to sustain those operations. So something as simple as running a farmer's market, you might get funding just for the farmer's market. You might get funding for the nutrition education that happened at the farmer's market. You might get funding for an arts program at the farmer's market. So you take the core idea, and I just use the farmer's market, right? Because it's simple, everybody understands the basics. And then you find these ways to kind of glob on other aspects to it that ultimately support the staff who are running the farmer's market and also a nutrition education program or what have you. All right, so let's get into some of the grant nuts and bolts. What I'd really like for you to take away today is to understand that, if you don't already, that every grant has this required structure, but all of these required structures are different. So understanding what the fine print is of that required structure is absolutely critical. And part of this too is understanding a little bit more of the gestalt of the funder themselves. If you're talking about a private foundation or even a family foundation, there's usually a lot of very specific kind of intimate details about why that foundation is funding what they're funding. Typically, it goes back to the family history or the history of the foundation, which can also go back to a family. And understanding that heritage is really important so that you're able to kind of speak to the mission of the foundation. So that's kind of in the gestalt category, but then you have these very specific nuts and bolts. How many pages, what are the major sections that are required? What's the format for those sections? Tons of details. I would also say, if you're really serious about getting into the grant writing sort of world, that it's good to compile all these peripheral items that grants require now. And I'll go through a list of most common ones that people ask for in grants or that you're required to submit, so you can start to compile them, because some of this peripheral stuff can really suck up your time. And if you only have 4 weeks or 6 weeks to respond to requests for proposals, you're gonna not want to spend that time like figuring out where your DUNS paperwork went, right? Like you want to have that already handy. And it's easy to say, harder to do, but precise, persuasive, and clear language is really the key. And I'll talk a little bit about that in terms of sort of providing a compelling introduction. Different funders, though, are going to have different expectations. So I know there's folks on this call who are in this meeting who are really down an NIH path, whereas there's others now that are probably looking a lot more at foundation. And so that kind of what is precise and persuasive to each of those will certainly vary. So before you write the grant proposal, there's like some obvious things you need to do. Get the grant proposal guidelines and the eligibility requirements to make sure that you're suited. Sometimes we play a little bit of Jenga with who's eligible and what also the budget looks like. At the University of Delaware, we have a required overhead of more than 60%. Now, some foundations won't honor that, and so we'll have to discuss whether or not the university would accept a lower overhead rate. So that is just one key aspect that can go into the eligibility requirements and really preferences about who would be a lead on a proposal and who would be a subcontractor. Also identifying if there's any match requirements and getting into the weeds early on about what those look like. So match, for those who aren't familiar, is can take on different forms. But one way that it looks is that a partner organization is willing to provide money and or space or time dedicated to the work, and in so doing kind of matches the resources that are going into it. It's not a one for, well, it's not necessarily that they're doing the exact same thing as another group is, but as a part of the collective, they're providing resources toward the bottom line. And what and how those resources are documented vary dramatically across different kinds of grants. So in some cases, it's a little bit flexible. They want you to sign a letter and they sort of trust you and leave it at that. In other instances, it's extremely rigid and they want to make sure that you have $1-for-$1 match basically in the bank already and that you can demonstrate how that money is going to be used. So looking at these requirements are key, because if you don't have that kind of partner, you're not going to really be able to go after that money. Obviously knowing the submission deadline. I'll also say with regard to the grant proposal guidelines, a lot of times you'll get the request for proposals or RFP or RFA, and that document will be one thing that's posted online. It's another thing though, to start the process of registering with the organization, figuring out what that online form looks like, because sometimes the online form does not match the proposal guideline form. Before you know it, you have to have things organized in a different way or uploaded in different PDFs. So at the same time that I usually obtain the grant proposal guidelines, I'll start to look online and figure out, like, what does this format really look like? Is this something, like, does it seem to match? How hard does this seem to be, so that you can figure out your time for all that administrative stuff. Personnel needs in general, as you start to spec out your budget and also your partnerships. And any other administrative requirements that the grant might include, which could also include some of those other papers that I was talking about. Just how many years has your organization been in operation? Do you have audit reports? Those kinds of things. A couple of other supporting materials, and I'll give everybody a chance to sort of comment on this. These are the common ones. So letters of support are very common. I'll say that there's this quirky thing in the grant world that unless someone tells you, I don't know how you would know. And I don't know that I've actually said it too many times, but a lot of times the letters of support are drafted by the person who's leading the grant writing effort. And that, so let's say, Denise, you're going to be a partner of mine. I might write the grant letter of support, like a rough draft for you, and then I send it to you, and then you would refine it and update it based on your experience or contributions, and then send it back to me. So that's one thing to keep in mind, because if you're writing the grant, you also have to draft, for the most part, those letters of support. Make sure your CVs or your resumes are in compliance with whatever the funder wants. I feel like we have a little bit of like CV craziness happening sometimes in our office. I know Terry Ann knows all about it, because the format that the Institute for Education Sciences wants your CV in is completely different than what the National Science Foundation, NSF, wants your CV in. And that's completely different from what the NIH is doing now, which is very different from just a regular old CV, which a foundation might expect. So there's these very specific CV formats that you'll have to be in compliance with, and your partners and any other leadership in your grant will also have to be in compliance with, that you just want to stay ahead of, because it can take people time to refine and revise all those things. Any other charts or tables that you know you might need to prepare, you can do those kind of in advance. Getting prepared for signatures. Depending on how dense your bureaucracy is, you might need to give people a heads up that something's coming down the pike and what the timeline is, so you can get those signatures. Format, I already talked about briefly, whether or not it's on paper, if you have to submit copies of anything, if it's an email submission, or if it's an online submission. And related to that is delivery requirements. Let me just pause here. Mia, I don't know if you'd like to comment on anything, if anybody has any comments or questions about this part.
No, well, two quick things. So another word for CV or resume, if anyone's heard the word biosketch. So that's sort of all a similar thing. And I agree, like having that in different formats and ready to go depending on the funding agency is a great idea, because it does take a lot of time. The other thing, just to reiterate, is to read the fine print. Even in the CTR, when we're reviewing pilot applications, for example, the easiest way to knock off applications is to do things like, oh, there's some spelling errors. Oh, you're over the page limit. Oh, you didn't put section 1.A, you put 1.1. So any of those little things that are in the fine print that you're expected to do that you might get wrong or don't do, that could be a reason for why your grant it doesn't even get reviewed. So really important to read the fine print, have someone else also read the fine print, so that you're making sure you get everything down.
Yeah, I have a funny story about that. My first NIH submission, I did it out of the nonprofit, and I had no idea really. We didn't have a lot of the other support systems that people at universities have. And there was a section about your county administrative office? And the answer was 1. And the administrative person who was working with me typed in ONE instead of 001. And our grant was rejected because of that. And despite asking, for sort of lenience, we weren't given it and we had to submit the next iteration. So it's crazy sometimes how these things go with the formatting requirement.
Yeah, and that's a good example too, to also not get defeated. Like, persistence, I think you had said, Alice, persistence really is key. Like, so just keep going, because you're gonna probably submit more grants than you're ever gonna get. But you just need a few to be successful.
In my evaluation capacity with ACCEL, I looked at the hit rates of most of funded researchers at the university. And I wonder if anybody has a guess of what percentage of grants that were submitted by ACCEL funded researchers actually get funded. This is in the last 10 years.
I see a 20% in the chat. Anyone else?
Okay. It's a little higher for ACCEL, so it's around 50%. And these are very experienced funded researchers. So I think like using that as a very high litmus, like at best, I think we could expect to get half. Most, though, I think would expect to get in that 20-25% range, which means, you submit 4, you might get 1 is still quite good. So just, don't feel defeated. So what are the key elements that you typically do find in the request for proposals? Usually you have to draft a cover letter, some kind of title page. Usually there's very specific instructions about this, or if it's online, those details will be in there. And believe it or not, the title page can take a while, especially if it has very specific information that you may or may not know about your organization. All of those sneaky little tax numbers and signatories and all of that goes in the title page. So if you have any gaps in your understanding of who's who, that can take a little while longer to complete. A simple summary or abstract, again, usually specific information about how many words and how that should be structured. And then typically in the grant itself, you would have some kind of introduction or background, a needs assessment, an articulation of what your goals and objectives are. And those may also include aims or specific aims if you're going after NIH funding or NSF. And then a description of the project itself. This is assuming that you might be doing a program or a project in addition to just studying a program or project. But usually I would think of it on some kind of sort of grayscale, where there's usually a shift between how much of a project you're implementing and how much measurement you're doing, but almost always there's a little bit of both, I would say. And then the evaluation design and any evaluation partners that you might have. What are you doing? We heard this question, I think, this morning. What are you doing about sustainability or scale up? Do you have a plan for that? Sometimes we'll ask it of you specifically. Other times it will just expect that you incorporate it into what you're doing. Staffing and administration plan that would go into your budget, as well as timetable. And part of that staffing and administration is really important in terms of who's going to be leading the project, what the rationale is for that particular person, whether or not you have a good measurement kind of person, because a lot of times what you're looking at is a leader who has good content expertise, somebody who is a good measurement person, maybe project management and basic program staff, and that there's not redundancy, but you do have all of your bases covered. So people think very carefully about, as reviewers, about who's staffing something and why that particular framework of staff is the best fit for the project. And then of course a budget and a budget narrative, which are typically 2 different documents. And then the agency documentation, which I have on the subsequent slide. Any other thoughts about this you want to add in, Mia?
No, that's great. It's really, it's science and it's team. So you think about your aims, but you got to think about your team too, right? And that staffing is really important.
Yeah. So this is my sort of cheat sheet of agency documentation. And you know, if you're not a 501c3, that's not going to be as important, but thinking about keeping it organized and updated, that you have a kind of a packet. The more you do this and the more sort of template stuff you can have ready to go, I think the easier it becomes. Your mission statement, if you have a certificate of incorporation, 501c3 documentation, and the year, of course, any other proof of a different form if you have a nonprofit status, your EIN number and your DUNS number, who your board members are. If you have board information like meeting minutes or contributions, might also be asked for. Broadly, an organizational chart for the structure of the organization, job descriptions for positions, especially positions that you frequently put into your grants. In general, how many full-time or part-time staff and volunteers do you work with on an annual basis? Current resumes of people, keeping them current, like every 6 months or so, updating them. A biography, a lot of times that biography goes into the description of the personnel, so keeping those handy is really helpful. Knowing what your organization's budget and program budget is helpful, as well as these auditor reports. So a lot of times you need to submit 5 years of audits, maybe only 1 year of audits. If you're submitting from a university like the University of Delaware, our grants department will take care of that paperwork, so you don't have to worry about that. But if you're submitting from like a smaller nonprofit, that would be on you to make sure you could supply. An annual report if you have one. Other funding sources you've received funds from before, that can come in really handy, and any matching funds you've received in the past. And then manuals like personnel policy or procedure manual, keeping those kind of all together is helpful. So then the goal is really to get to a point where you can get a boilerplate going, where you have some key documents that are kind of chunks of what typically go into proposals. So it gives you that kickstart and that like emotional sense of accomplishment where you can start to populate things when you're in that intimidation mode of like, I don't know if I really can do this. It'll help you get over, I think, some of the hump. Organizational history is good. Current programs, paragraph or two about what each of your programs is doing, current successes, including just how many people you're serving. Any short little outcomes you might have is good to have as a boilerplate. You might also have, if you're at a university, a little bit of a background about your department, or about, like I have a research center, right, about what our research center does and some of its successes. You could have something that's specific to that. Descriptions of the community and the need. If you typically serve the same zip code or the same few blocks or the same general population, keeping that handy as its own boilerplate document can be excellent. And to the extent that you have staff who have some downtime, they can always update it every year or so, but in general, having that handy is good. Existing formal linkages within the community or with other partnerships is always good to have written up. So when the last time was that you work with somebody, who it is that you most typically work with, any publications maybe that you've done together is useful to have. Needs assessments, program evaluation reports, forms or procedures that you use, good to have. And then publicity is another really big one. We used to always lead off with the fact that we were named one of Harvard's, I don't remember exactly, but like top 10 innovations in health or something. And we would always lead with it. And it was like a big newspaper article that, you know, came out, but it was kind of catching for the reader. It gave you some credibility, but it was really, you know, based in this award that, you know, we had applied for and so forth. But keeping this sort of current events, I think, award sort of things too, even if they seem kind of small at the time, I think it's really useful to be able to think about them too in a grant context.
Matt has a question. Oh, go ahead, Matt.
Oh yeah, I'm thinking I write mostly NIH grants,
Okay.
and I was interested to see you have a description of the community and the need. Is that something like for an NIH style grant you'd actually put in like the environment section? I've never seen that before, but it's kind of an interesting idea.
I think it depends on your area of science. So, you know, I'm a social scientist and I do a lot of work around food retail and food deserts, for example. So describing community in need is like, you know, goes hand in hand with the kind of work that I do. It would always be sort of a logical piece to talk about disparities or gaps in resources. I'm sure that in other areas it's less common though. I don't know, Mia, you kind of bridge a gap for us.
Yeah, I think that it's always nice to, I mean, I love this, like, actually, I love check sheets or checklists. So like you have really nice checklists to have this handy. Agree that it's more sort of for a foundation type grant to sort of have the community need, but the NIH, what I hear is moving towards also including like the community, and even for bench science, I think we heard this morning, like how kind of writing that arc, I think is what one of the, you know, and so you have that description of the community need, thinking more about the impact, like how does the work you're doing, regardless of where it is on the translational spectrum, impact the community. And so if you have that description there, then you can write that, turn that around for an NIH grant.
I feel like there might have been another question or comment. All right. So we talked about the importance of clarity and precision and being persuasive. And I'm sort of, I think, talking to the middle here, right, on a lot of our guidelines. I'll say also specifically with regard to NIH, I think it's also under clarity, simplicity to some extent is really important. Again, it seems like I'm in I think every sector is specific, and even within the NIH, whatever review panel you're on is, you know, you kind of know the same cast of characters and you get a sense of the kinds of proposals that come through. But I'll say broadly, when I see more than 3 aims, it says to me that this is a novice. Or if I see aims that seem, you know, sort of layered or with a lot of different possibilities sort of built into them, it also tells me that that this is probably a proposal that needs refining. So part of what I would also say is clarity is in some ways simplicity, keeping it very, you know, one for one in terms of what you're measuring and exactly why you're measuring that. And I think every single person who's ever applied to some of these larger mechanisms has a laundry list like Santa Claus's that goes on and on and on about everything we think we could possibly get out of that data and why it would be important to look at a variety of different relationships in our data. But at the end of the day, it's about really drawing the line and just sticking to one core set. And then later on, once you have the data, you can do other things with it. But in the beginning, you know, keeping it really simple is important.
I think too, here, just some advice. Some advice. So 2 pieces of advice along those lines. One is, once you have your aims, you know, like prepare a 1-pager that you can share with the funding agency, or the person that represents the RFA or the RFP that came out, and then have a dialogue with them to make sure it's the right fit, to ask them questions. Don't be shy, I guess, or afraid of bridging that conversation. It's really important. They're there to help you. They don't want applications that don't fit either. So when you have those aims, or a short, like 1-page, kind of, this is where I want to go and this is why, feel free to share it and reach out to people. And the other advice I have is, try not to chase funding, right? So you have whatever it is you're passionate about and you're building. And maybe one year there are no RFAs that come out that fit exactly your niche. You don't want to like twist something where it'll become evident that what you're doing is chasing the funding instead of building the science. So continue to, you know, go along the path that you're going along, because eventually like funding will come. I know it's hard to think when you need that funding, but funding will come for what you are trying to do. And so just stick with it and be persistent. That's my sage advice.
Do other people in the meeting have advice? Because I know everybody is also on their own sort of trajectory. I'm wondering if others have thoughts for what's worked for them.
Hi, this is Erin. Can I share something that I've seen?
Yeah, Erin.
I love it. Yep.
So I'm on a different avenue than most of you guys, because I'm actually helping support investigators get the funding. So something that I've seen through the last several years is a lot of times people will get the idea to put off to the end things like bio sketches and letters of support and some of those supporting documents. And honestly, that is probably one of the most stressful things you could do to yourself. I would encourage folks to, as was mentioned here several times, have a draft document already ready before an RFA goes, and then also work at those early versus saving them for the end, because it sounds like it's going to be an easy thing to do, but then sometimes you're chasing down people to get letters of support, or staff is out, and it's not something you should wait to the end. So I would just share with folks, as soon as you know you're going to apply for funding, start working on some of those sort of administrative documents.
All right. Any other advice?
Hi, this is Shannon. This might be speaking from my own lack of skills, but getting into the platforms when you're submitting electronically and familiarizing yourself. I think Dr. Pappas knows, for me particularly, that was a moment of stress I had in a submission where I was like, I have everything. And then I was like, oh my gosh, something's happening on the technical end. And of course I waited till, the last minute to upload things. So just sharing my experience and familiarizing yourself with those platforms is helpful.
Yeah, it is no joke. Some of them are very complicated and can be frustratingly different from what the guidance says. So before you know it, you're like rejiggering what goes with what, and yeah.
There was a question in the chat. Does ACCEL offer workshops or resources to help develop a strong bio sketch? I can't think of any off the top of my head. Erin, do you know?
Love that idea.
Yeah, actually, the Professional Development Court does do that. So when folks are awarded MRDAs, it's part of the program, but it's something that our MRDAs go through in their education. But that piece of the platform is open to everybody. So if anybody does want help or assistance with a biosketch, you can reach out to me. It's just erin.regal@nemours.org. And we had kind of assigned you a member from our senior mentoring group, and they will work one-on-one to go through your biosketch and help you prepare a biosketch.
That was my question. So thank you for that answer. That's great for myself and for some of my colleagues, who really haven't gone through that process at all.
And I will put my email in the chat so you guys have it.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Sorry, I'm frozen. Okay. So I'm going to jump into some strategies for writing up need. And there are kind of two aspects to this that I'll cover today. There's obviously a lot of facets to grant writing, so we're keeping it, I think, kind of in the middle again. But one is developing the rationale for your work, which I think is really important. Setting the stage for why what you're doing matters. I have seen it make or break grants that are small or large. And in fact, I think it's saddest when I read a beautiful NIH proposal that has really well thought out aims, but when it comes back to that big question of significance, like to what extent is this really going to change science or improve our understanding of a scientific problem, and that rationale isn't there, it's sort of a deal breaker. And I think sometimes as we get into our own fields, it's easy to forget that everybody doesn't know why this thing that you want to study is particularly important. So I'll just kind of remind folks about some of developing a rationale. And I'm going to raise 6 points in there of data that you might want to bring to bear. Some will be more appropriate for funders of one type than another, but in general, I think it's important to rethink what your rationale is on a regular basis. And then the second piece that I'll cover when it comes to writing up need is a more general conversation about connecting activities to outcomes, and a little bit around logic models, and like I said, the Lucidchart feature. So as we talk just about developing a rationale, 4 basic steps: identifying your appropriate information, titling your rationale, if you're gonna, keep it as a smaller document, writing the content and making sure you have your reference list. So 6 kinds of information, and some of what I'm going to present here will probably get you thinking in a little bit different direction, which was sort of the point. Not all of it will be particularly relevant for all funders, like I said, but the first one is the voice of the harmed. So to what extent are you able to express the needs and the wants of the priority population in your document? And especially, I think, for foundation funders or even individual donors, having handy firsthand reports, which could come out of newspaper articles, quotes from the state or even from the CDC, perhaps, of the critical nature of something is really important. This kind of voice is much less heard, of course, in NIH type funding, but in general, I think it makes for a good rationale. The next is something that you probably would go to anyway, the idea of what's the problem in numbers from a status perspective. A reminder, Healthy People 2030 is out. It's been out for a little while now, but we've all sort of been under a rock with COVID. But I did also see that the Healthy People website has been down for the last couple of days, so I'm not sure if it's up today, but it's a really great resource to think about objectives, programs, even contextualizing a condition or a situation. So I'll kind of remind you to rethink, if you haven't been at Healthy People 2030, to go back there. And also this idea of describing the problem first from a global perspective, and global might really be international, or it might be across the US, or it might be across a certain population or subpopulation, and then bringing it down to this micro level. So what is the state or locality situation as well? A couple more pieces of information. Thinking about the broader decision makers and what they feel is really important. So kinds of information that fit into this higher up sort of thinking could be what the foundation itself is prioritizing, what their strategic plan is. You could think about what the state's strategic plan is, or what the Cancer Consortium has decided are priorities for this year. Thinking about these bigger institutions and what their goals are can be an important component of your own rationale. This is also related because a lot of times what decision makers are talking about, of course, is this organizational, state, or national plan, but being able to put the two together is important. So the last two, providing evidence that your proposed program will make a difference. And this is bringing into light that there's a similar program somewhere else that resulted in some kind of change. And normally when it comes to intervention science, we're talking about shifting programs from being what was done before to something far more specialized and specific to our location, with a number of other nuts and bolts that are distinctive and science-based. But coming back to having some kind of rationale, and you understand how the needle was moved before, and the magnitude of that effect, as well as just sort of the idea that these kinds of programs can result in something impactful, is really important to be able to show in your proposal and your rationale. Then last, I think, considering how, and in this case, it's protecting and preserving the needs and wants of the people, coming full circle to that first topic, where what is it that the community is calling for? How is this tying to prevention strategies or treatment that's related specifically to the needs and wants of people? So this could just be a statement about how this connection is going to happen. And again, this is one that you wouldn't see as much in a scientific research proposal as you would in, say, a foundation proposal. The idea that you're really engaged with the community here. I'm going to jump into a couple of pointers. And again, this is sort of nuts and bolts on writing style. So everybody's going to have their own approach, but these are some of the tactics that I found most often that my students struggle with that can be useful, I think, for others. So first of all, making sure that there's a connection to this greater health or educational issue. What is it that you're proposing, but not just in a specific way? How is it connected to this bigger piece? So for example, if you want to implement a physical activity program for children, you're going to probably want to tie that to obesity, think about childhood obesity rates, right? The shift in childhood obesity, tying it to that larger issue. I'll also say that I think people who don't write grants as much as others are more likely to use what I would call sweeping statements of importance rather than specific facts. And I am still learning how to communicate this well personally as an instructor. But the idea is that your statements have to be supported by data or research. And so here's a couple silly examples of what I mean. Instead of you telling me that the parking lot is very empty, tell me that of 200 spots, only 1 is full. Hopefully that helps to describe, I don't want the sweeping statement of importance, which is that the parking lot is very empty. I want to be able to see for myself through your data presentation that this parking lot is very empty. So I'm going to conclude when you tell me that of 200 spots, only 1 is full, that I can see right now in my mind, huge parking lot, only 1 full, the parking lot's pretty empty. I'm concluding it for myself through your data. Here's another example. Mental health is important. Instead, you could tell me that poor mental health is associated with a 50% greater chance of premature death. By the way, all the facts that I put in here are not true. I just made them up for the sake of a compelling argument. Another example would be, instead of saying that these topics are meaningful for children, say specifically how. While 10% of adults suffer with depression, more than 40% of adolescents report depressive episodes. So getting to me this idea that I can compare and make a determination for myself. I have one more slide, or actually 2 more slides of specific pointers, and I won't spend too much more time on this, except to say that breaking down the idea of how to write these can be useful. Again, this data isn't real. But starting with a broad statement, for example, childhood obesity is a challenge for more than 20 million children in America. You can see now, right, that I took one of my 6 key facts. I got some epidemiology from the national perspective. Then I'm going to try and bring it down to something a little bit more specific. There's particular concern for rising rates in children under the age of 5, where the change in obesity has tripled over the past 20 years. So while I did do a sweeping important statement that there's particular concern among rising rates in children, I told you why. Because children under the age of 5, I gave you that fact right straight away. I didn't just leave it at a general particular concern kind of comment. And the more that you can use comparisons here or articulate the trends in numbers and let the reader conclude what that trend looks like, I think is for the better. Other tips, you might bring it back down to specific to Delaware. You might bring in resources from Delaware. You could talk about the Secretary of Health's quote or something the governor said, or again, to about Healthy People 2030 and where they are on these issues. The last point that I'll make on this kind of writing a rationale, and then we'll kind of transition to another more active component of this presentation, is to think about the research that's been done before. So having a little bit of a summary of similar work. So if I'm doing a physical activity intervention, I probably want to pull out some of the other interventions that have been done in the physical activity space. There's a program called Go Noodle, for example, that has a bit of research, bringing to bear how much Go Noodle had an effect, where it was done, how effective it was, is really important to set the stage for the intervention that I'm considering. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Mia any pointers that you might have, additional thoughts or reflections you have on some of what I covered here.
Thanks, Allison. No, that was great. I think, I've been teaching how to sort of write science for a long time. And one of the most difficult things for people to do is to write rationales with numbers. But it is like numbers are so important. And I love your example of the empty parking lot because it's just such a different visual, right? Once you have that number, you can actually then feel like, oh, the importance of the emptiness, right? Before it's just empty, but now it's, 200 spots and one is full. What if it were 5,000 spots and one is full? Like that actually, feels so different, but so difficult to write with numbers, I think, for most of us who aren't trained in that. So just to stress that and to use the numbers that matter. So for example, if you have a very rare childhood disease that you're studying, maybe you use a number like years of potential life lost, right? To kind of match the metric to the disease and the disease state, instead of like 1 in 3 billion people have this disease. You can use a different metric to bring it home. But really, really important. The other pointer I will have is in building your team. When you talk about teams, it's also, I think they said it this morning and it's been a thread sort of throughout the day, but it's really important to understand what the incentives are for you, right, in writing the grant, but also your participants, your co-investigators, your community, like what is incentivizing, like what's the rationale and the reason behind why your team is coming together. I think it's really important when you set out on the journey of writing a grant.
Any other comments or questions from participants in the group? All right. I'm trying to advance my screen, but my computer.
While you're advancing, I'll have one other tip is don't be afraid. Like sometimes you might feel defeated because you feel like you have to say what you're doing is so novel and new and no one's ever done it before. But sometimes it might just be a small extension or a different population. Or maybe you're repeating the same thing in a different context. So don't feel like everything you have to do has to be new and novel and where you're writing like no one's ever done this before. If you're writing that, then you're probably wrong.
Yeah.
Stop there.
That's a really good point. I think that's another sort of novice mistake is thinking you have to make it really innovative. Innovation is a relative concept, and just adding a small tweak to something that's pretty well documented can become innovative. All right, so I'm just going to move forward in connecting activities to outcomes. I'm sure a lot of you would like my screen to advance, like me. Hang on. Okay, there we go. A lot of you are familiar with the flow of a logic model. This is just one simple model. I have one more slide in here that I would call a cheat sheet, another sort of tool in the box. If you're not familiar, logic models typically describe what's invested, what kind of inputs you're going to put into a program, then what kind of activities you're doing. I'm going to focus a lot today on activities into outcomes, because I think that's where the sort of the rubber meets the road, thinking about what actually you're going to do and what the result of that is. And we think about these results, and for those who have gone through, an evaluation class, this is not new news, but we think about things in terms of two different kind of categories of what happens as a result. One category we call outputs, which is basically the numbers of products or services that are provided, not whether or not they did anything for anybody, just the fact that you actually provided them. So a lot of times we give the example of brochures. It could be that the brochure was in Russian and nobody in the community was Russian, but technically you have outputs of having distributed 1,000 brochures. Now, the outcome of that brochure would be pretty zeroed out because no one could read it, but the output would be 1,000 brochures. So that's just simply the number of products or services you provided, not whether or not they did anything for anybody. Once you move into short-term, medium-term, and long-term outcomes or results, then you're starting to think a little bit more about the knowledge, attitude, behavior, maybe even the biological shifts that occur as a result of the program or the intervention that you're working on. I apologize that this is a little bit blurry, but I will tell you that I think this is one of the best for dummies logic model examples that's around. It's sort of an oldie but a goodie. And in particular, I'll draw your attention to the section on activities. It gives you a good idea of the kinds of activities that typically go into interventions. And if you're brainstorming your strategy, you might want to come back here and think, go through this checklist and think to yourself, oh, have I forgotten anything here? Especially these ideas about working with media or social media, thinking about assessment. That's a key activity that sometimes people forget. And then the other nice sort of cheat sheet element of this, this slide is when it gets to the short-term, medium-term, and long-term impacts. These are categories here. You'll have to write them out a little more specifically, and we're not going to go through the strategy that we typically use to do that here today. But I will say that this is, again, good categorical cheat sheet. Think to yourself, am I going to try and change opinions? Am I going to try and change attitudes? Am I going to try and develop skills? To what extent am I going to try and shift a policy or a behavior? And some of those things, then you can figure out where they go in terms of short-term, medium-term, or longer-term. The other aspects of this, for example, assumptions, external factors here at the bottom, and recognition that evaluation happens across the spectrum. We could spend time discussing those, but frankly, people focus on them a little bit less. Perhaps external factors are included, especially now that we're thinking more about race and systematic racism. I think some of these factors come into play more now than they have in the past, but generally the heart of a logic model is around this activities, participants, and impact, and really naming those. So why are logic models useful? We typically talk about them being useful for a couple of reasons. First, it helps other people understand what you're trying to do. It also can help you understand what you're trying to do, or your team. The practice of actually going through and developing the model can help suss out everybody's understanding. And they're also a pretty big part of evaluability assessments if you ever have to do one of those. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is a fan of those. So you might come into that as well. I'm just going to keep going here and help you. My dog is scratching herself in a way that makes her yelp. So logic model thinking simplified. I find that a lot of times people have trouble getting from one step to the next in a logic model. So if we're thinking about getting from the activity to the output and then to the outcome, and the outcomes, by the way, typically become our objectives. I'll say that again. So getting from the activity to the output, and then getting from the output to the outcome, and a lot of times the outcomes become our objectives. So I'm going to walk us through a silly example, but I think it helps everybody get on the same page about how we think about this trajectory. So let's just say that the activity that I'm going to do is I'm going to take my car for a car wash once a week. So what will result when I take my car for a car wash every week? Well, a lot of things could result, but the first thing that I would ask myself is, why does it matter? What do I expect to result? Well, I would expect my car to be clean. The first thing I want you to notice here is that this is not that big of a jump. Sometimes people try to make really big leaps as they're doing these models. It doesn't have to be rocket science. It can just go as simple from my car is getting washed, so now I have a clean car, right? Not that hard, but very helpful. So now we ask ourselves, again, just focusing on why does it matter that your car is clean? So if we just think about why our car is clean, maybe there's a couple of different reasons. If you've got a good looking car, maybe you think you're going to get some more dates. Maybe also if you have a good looking car, you'll have an improved condition of the car because it's not going to have all that stuff that the pollen is dropping on our cars right now, or bird poop and all the rest of it that falls when you park under a tree. Your car's condition is going to be improved. Less erosion from the salt underneath. Okay, we get the idea. So now you ask yourself, why does it matter if you get more dates? Why does it matter if your car's condition is improved? Well, maybe I'll have an improved social life. I'll be less lonely, right? My well-being will be improved. Also, maybe I'll have an economic effect. The resale value of my car will be improved. So you can see then how we can get from something like a simple activity through the logic of what we expect to result one step at a time to these larger overarching objectives, which would include then things like improving social life or improving, your economic potential through something like improved resale value. Let me pause here.
I have a question, Allison.
Sure.
Now, are you using this typically just sort of for your own thinking and for your team's planning, or would you actually include something like this or one of the previous slides in the actual grant, like the text of the grant, to kind of show the reviewers how this all fits together?
I'm interested in your perspective too, Mia. I've seen it across many conditions. So everything from planning to implementation, and yes, at times in grants as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I thought you were gonna say it depends, Allison. That's what so it definitely depends on, some funding agencies actually ask for a logic model. So clearly you'll need it. A lot of times I like doing it for the first reason. Really, it just kind of helps the team sort of think about and know what you're doing. It helps drive your study design, your analytic plan, the variables that you're going to collect. And so you might not put the complicated sort of logic model itself in a grant application, but you use it as the foundation for then the pieces that you do put, right? And it keeps those guardrails on, it keeps you focused, it keeps you from trying to put everything under the sun into your study. And then it helps you write a little bit of, why what you're including, and why what you're not including, you're not including. Does that make sense? Yeah. I think more programmatic grants, in my experience, kind of like logic models, but like a epidemiologic grant or something like that. It's not really, I wouldn't put a logic model in something like that, but I would do one because it does help.
To that point too, Mia, I'll say I've had sometimes to put together logic models after, like, I'm doing things in the wrong order, I'll confess. Like, I'm writing the grant because I just start and I've got to get going on it. And then it says it needs a logic model and I start to do the logic model. And then I realize what a knucklehead I've been, that I didn't actually include some of the key middle steps, like this bit about getting more dates, and that I was assuming that my reader would know that taking my car for a wash was going to get me to an improved social life. And I'm like, I probably should have said some of these middle pieces. And so it can kind of illuminate, even, if you're pretty confident, like it is a good exercise to go through. I'm always surprised at how much I learn when I do them. Agreed. Even though I find them annoying sometimes. So we only have 10 minutes left, and I'm gonna maybe circle back if we still have time at the end, but I wanna make sure that you all are aware of a couple of resources. Again, the toolbox, I guess. There is something called a community toolbox, which was put together by Kansas. I think it's the University of Kansas or Kentucky. Anyway, sorry, KU.
I think it's Kentucky.
Kentucky, okay,
yeah.
Thanks.
I love it. This is awesome.
Yeah, and it's an oldie but a goodie, I would say. I'm not sure the last time they updated it, but they have a lot of resources on here. for all different kinds of strategies, including logic models. I put the link here to the logic model, but once you go there, you'll see that it's got everything that you might need resources for related to community-based program development and grant making. The other resource that I have here is a tool that we use a lot at CRESP called Lucidchart. If you're not familiar with it, it basically solves the problem that we all used to get frustrated with Excel or PowerPoint on, to try and move boxes easily and also arrows. And I'll just give you an example. This is a screenshot from a Lucidchart logic model that I recently did for an organization called Sevatruck. And you can see that, like, the way that these boxes come together and the way that the arrows come together, it's a really, really easy to use tool. You basically just pull the shape from the left and plop it into the center, and then you can easily click on an arrow and tie things together. And it locks things into grids, but not in a way that you can't move them around. So I find it really useful. You can also change colors. Like sometimes, for example, even the Excel logic model, which Sue and I worked on a lot, you can color like certain sections. If you have a huge project and you're only going to be working on like 5 things this year, you can color those, say, purple, and then everybody knows that there's this acknowledgement that you have this bigger system, but that we're just going to be focusing on 5 aspects of it. So if you haven't been familiarized before with Lucidchart, I kind of recommend it. I'm not a salesperson for them. You can get a free trial. I think that gives you like 5 or 6 diagrams for free. Yeah, it's very handy for these sorts of things. Also, diagrams related to employee diagrams, you know, where you want to put people in different places, put people in a box.
Your org chart. It'll do an org chart. Yeah, that's awesome.
You know what else it has, which is a little less of a challenge historically, but is also very helpful, is Gantt charts. It has preset Gantt charts, so you can just quickly populate a Gantt chart if you're trying to do a timeline. A Gantt chart, for those who don't know, is sort of like a big table with your timeline as the column headers, and then you sort of shade in different sections, so it makes that process a little bit easier. So we'll kind of just finish up with a funding overview. Generally, nonprofits have one of these 5 sources of funding: foundation money, individual donor money, money from corporations, earned income. Even though you're a nonprofit, you can earn income, and government sources, government grants. This is a little bit old, sorry about this, but a lot of the funding for nonprofits in the US does come from individuals, individual donors. Subscriptions is another way that sometimes people capture individual donor money, with these other forms also readily represented. So the big question that everybody wants to know the answer to is, how do I find these grant opportunities? And I wish I had a really simple answer for you, but the truth is it's not that simple. Grants.gov, which is the last item on this list, is probably the most common for federal grants. It's easy to subscribe to the list. It's a little bit of a craft to figure out your keywords. I know people who won't share their keywords because they've spent so much time perfecting them, it feels like their secret sauce. But you can play around with grants.gov. You'll see what's in there is both grants and contracts and other forms of money that the government is trying to, I guess, distribute. So you want to be careful about what they're really calling for and if it's a grant or not. But that's one place to look. You will not find foundation money in there for the most part. It's really just federal and state money, and you get really crazy things in there. You never know what they're calling for, like a glue manufacturer or something. You'll get that will be in that system. The Delaware County Community Foundation, it is, I think, more and more becoming a partner with a lot of the grants that are distributed within Delaware from Delaware. So I recommend going to DCF. We had hoped to have them here today, but there was a conflict with timing. But definitely check them out. They have a number of opportunities out right now. And then the last, which I know is at the top of this list, that I'll bring your attention to is called the Foundation Center. Now, the Foundation Center is a little bit more tricky because you have to have a subscription. If you're with a university like the University of Delaware, they do have a subscription, and you can get a sense of what they have online with this second link where it says guides.lib.udel.edu. Now, I fully am aware that everyone on this in this session is not necessarily a member of the UD community. It could very well be that your own institution has a subscription, or if you don't have a subscription and you're part of this partnership, I'm happy to connect with you someday. And if you want to just reach out to me and do a quick download for you of what's in there based on my UD access. Terry Ann might also be willing to kind of serve as a conduit to the UD library connection. The other thing I know about the Foundation Center is that the Free Library of Philadelphia, for example, other large institutional libraries have subscriptions. And so sometimes you can get in as a public and as part of the general public. And I'll just do a quick, if it will come up for me here.
And our library system does have a place where you can ask them, Delaware State Library System, ask them for resources. So if the Delaware State Library doesn't have a subscription to this, there's a place where you can ask. So it might be worth checking it out.
I think, why don't we just go into questions, and I'll pull this up while we're talking, Mia, if I can kind of pass the torch to you. I know we only have like a few more minutes.
We have about, I think, 4 more minutes.
Yeah.
The state is also has a place where they have all the state RFAs, RFPs out for state of Delaware. But in the last sort of 3 minutes, are there any questions, information people want to share, what you would like to see on the CTR website? Additional things you might feel like will be helpful?
I have a question.
Great, thank you so much.
Oh, sorry, Matt.
You're welcome, Matt. Go ahead, Terry Ann.
Okay, just from the layman's perspective and from the community's perspective, if someone who doesn't really have a lot of grant experience, like maybe that's something you guys can put on the website, like just starting off, you know, because sometimes when you look at it as a whole, it gets kind of daunting, but like just if you have the initial steps that you would have to take, that can be helpful as well.
Mm-hmm. And just to kind of answer the question, I think if you're truly a novice, the first thing you should do is find a partner. I know that when we were a very small nonprofit, I went to the Food Trust when we were 6 people. The first thing I did was contact professors at Penn so that we could collaborate, and I could start to sort of build my my skills and also my recognition as somebody who did this kind of work within the grant making community, so that eventually I could step out on my own. But you know, in the beginning, I think you really kind of have to tag team with somebody who is a little more established.
Completely agree, Allison. I think for, you know, junior investigators, the Junior Investigator Network kind of within the CTR is a good place to go and find, you know, bring ideas or find information and get a mentor, someone you can work with. And then for community groups, for sure, looking at university, you know, faculty who might have common interests and connecting with them. Again, because university faculty are incentivized to write grants, and this is part of what they do and their expertise. So thinking about those incentives and aligning your incentives is important. This is cool, Allison. I like that.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about. You know, the one thing I always get frustrated with this is it doesn't give me what I want, which is like, just tell me the open grants that are available. Instead, it gives you a lot of information about organizations and information about who has applied and won before. So you can see who's getting the money from the foundation. Almost feels like getting into the weeds of like a family or something. But it is really, really useful. And you can get to that part I just talked about, what grants are currently open, but it just takes a little more work.
Awesome. We are at 3 o'clock. I think there's a lot of thank yous. This was great. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Allison, for leading this excellent session.
Thank you, Mia.
Hopefully everyone enjoyed the day. We will talk to the CTR folks and see about having kind of some of this put on the website and sharing the slides. I know for sure that this is recorded, and so there will be a special place to get the recording. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.